I had a speech all prepared, and I was going to talk about Four Seasons and Izzy Sharp, but I got an email this morning, and I want to tell you about that story because I think it actually sets the context a little bit better. We decided to simplify our life, and we sold our Florida condo. The real estate broker became a friend. She sent me an email this morning and said her son had come for a visit down in Florida, where it's a real sauna right now. She said, he's getting his MBA, and he had a course or a case on Hertz, the auto rental company that got in such trouble. But it was the market leader, and so it makes a great case study about how a company can become the world leader in car rentals, and went bankrupt. And he said, "Mom, they focused too much on profits and not enough on NPS." So she said it, and she knew I'd appreciate that. But I thought, oh, he doesn't know the half of this, because this is probably the most classic illustration of a company who was founded on the right principles. This was a family business that started up in the early 1900s. Somebody had the courage to buy a dozen Model T Fords and treated customers right and build it on referral. And Hertz, by the way, I'm told, translates from German, Dutch, Hertz. It either means, I think it means heart, but you use it so it either means kind-hearted or stout-hearted. It's when you describe someone that, and kind-hearted and stout-hearted is sort of like love and loyalty, which is the essence of this philosophy that Net Promoter is built on. And it struck me that, isn't it ironic that a company who got the love and loyalty right to become the biggest in the world, then moral bankruptcy precedes financial bankruptcy, because they were at the leading edge of finding these bad profits. How do I have a late fee or overcharge for gasoline, the tricks and the traps that they've become so famous for? And as moral bankruptcy set in, financial bankruptcy followed. And so love and loyalty is at the core. I think all great organizations are built on those principles, and NPS is a philosophy. It's not a metric. I mean, there has to be a metric to make it practical. But at its core, as you'll see, love and loyalty is what creates enrichment. And the instant companies lose that and forget what Hertz really means, bad things are ahead. This is Izzy Sharp, the guy that founded the Four Seasons hotels. He was one of the guys I studied years and years and years ago, probably my first book back in the early 90s. And I asked him, how is it that this philosophy that you build your business on has been so successful everywhere, Africa, Middle East, New York City, LA? And he said, well, it really is that the way we treat people, our culture, seems to work everywhere in the world. And when you get it right, customers love that. And he described his philosophy as the golden rule of treating people the way you'd want a loved one treated. You go on the religious talent about love thy neighbor as thyself, which I think is a pretty cool way to think about it. But it's a lot better and more important. It's not just don't do bad things to others, which I think was what the Torah got at, and probably Confucius. But this enlightened idea, and I'm told by Adam that we're in a place where the enlightenment actually happens. So I think the enlightened understanding of love thy neighbor is what Izzy Sharp built his entire business on. And it has crushed the competition, at least while the Hertz was well understood. So when you see NPS, I hope you will think not just of satisfaction and feedback, but think about the philosophy at its core. Every time you touch a life, you enrich it or diminish it. And if you want to make the world a better place, if you want to lead a life of kind-hearted, stout-hearted success, then you have to think about how can I track that and keep my balance sheet and see whether I'm making progress toward enriching more lives and diminishing fewer. So Net Promoter is just a simple way to make that balance sheet real. When you enrich a life, when you really solve someone's problem, put a smile on their face, they do tend to give you a 9 or a 10 on that question of would you recommend us to a friend. And when you do the opposite, when you diminish their life, you've made the world worse. And it's practical and important for profits, but it's fundamentally important to a well-lived life and a good society, and of course, a prosperous business. Why likely to recommend is at the core of this? I started this years and years ago with the idea that one question. Frankly, I don't like surveys at all. I don't fill out surveys very often. But if I have to fill out a survey, one, maybe two questions, but one scoring question. And so, as many of you know, we searched, let's be scientific. What is the one question that gets to the core of have I enriched a life, have I diminished a life? And how do we know that? Because we watch the behaviors. When you enrich a life, people come back for more. They treat your employees with dignity and respect. They give you, they share their problems. They're open and they trust you. There's dozens of behaviors that make it clear you've enriched a life. But if you need it simple, it's would recommend. Why is that? Because when you dig into it, people don't recommend it's not trivial. It's not a marketing campaign. It's because they know these people, it's rational, of course, the best value, best technology, but it's so much more than that. And when I was younger, I thought it was that this was a rational thing. You wouldn't risk your personal reputation giving advice to go buy something that wasn't the very best. But the more important part is it's the emotional side. You don't recommend and co-brand your personal reputation unless you care. These people you trust them to treat people right and live up to a set of values. And it's this mixture of, my goodness, and frankly, there was a CEO that told me, Fred, I know I've read all your stuff. I understand this is the best predictor of future behavior, but you've really missed the boat. I don't recommend a company who pollutes the environment or abuses their employees. So recommendation is at this highest level. It's a moral judgment, and it has huge economic consequences. But please don't forget, this is a moral judgment, and it has to be interpreted that way and made that way. And I was thinking about, what is a recommendation? It's an act of love. You have had your life enriched so impressively that you want to share that with someone you care about. So it's that act of love that I think creates this fusion engine that creates better life and better economics. So when I say love and loyalty is at the core, I really am. I do mean that. Now, we've learned by making this an open source system, we have learned from the practitioners who put it to work. And one of the earliest ones was Apple. Apple Retail had this philosophy that they wanted to enrich the lives they touch. And so Net Promoter was the obvious choice for them. They showed me how to apply it in a retail setting. We didn't know that. When I invented this thing, my experience is Bain & Company. So we invented Net Promoter from the point of view of a business-to-business, sort of large enterprise servicing organization. So that was how we had used Net Promoter inside Bain. But these guys were retailers dealing with consumers, and it was the same philosophy that made it work. It continues today. Tim Cook, at one of these big product launches where they got Oprah Winfrey, and I know this is a very impressive audience, but these guys, they attract thousands of people. But he said the same philosophy. Customers, enriching the lives of customers is the core of what we do. And that is a radical idea. Let's step back. How many of your companies really believe that enriching the lives of their customers is why they exist? Because if you do, you're lucky to work there. We find that only about 10% of the large companies in the world today, would agree with that proposition, that our primary purpose is to make our customers' lives better. They think it's all stakeholders, or it's shareholder value, it's something. But what they haven't figured out is, no matter what they say their purpose is, because they measure their progress and set their priorities and pay bonuses on profits, accounting becomes their measure of progress, and therefore, what accounting sells for? Profits. And profits becomes purpose. So all the decisions, the priorities, become evaluated on this thing that does not have love or loyalty incorporated whatsoever. Profits Accounting profits measures how much money you extract from your customers' wallets and how efficiently you do that. That's an important part of the equation, but it's not the source. The source is enriching the lives of your customers and turning them into promoters. And because we haven't measured that and made it explicit, and even if we measure it, we do it sloppily and with surveys only, it's never trusted. So we still have such a long way to go to live up to the Apples of the world that actually have the core mission in their hearts. I asked one of the people who had the highest net promoter score in their retail system what it feels like when she gets a 10 from a customer. She said, well, it feels like I'm living the right life. She said, I went to Quaker school, I care about the golden rule, one life at a time. So in her estimation, that gave her a job of meaning and purpose and was her yardstick of, was she doing the right thing? So lots of apples out there, lots of good experimenters. Lego, there thousands of companies have adopted Net Promoter. And I think now it is almost, if it's not ubiquitous, it's pretty darn close. Fortune did a cover story on NPS a couple of years ago and concluded that over 2/3 of the top 1,000 companies in the world use Net Promoter. And when I read that, I thought, wow, I think about 5 or 10% of them actually use it the way I had intended. That if I said, what does love or loyalty have to do with Net Promoter, you just blank stare. It's about 0 through 10 and linking it to your bonus and making it a KPI, which is the best way to destroy its value that I know of. And that's what most people have done. It's logical, because if you're serious about something, you're a senior executive, you learn. You put it in people's bonuses. You show that you care about it. But in so doing, a survey is so complicated. What the response rate is, who responds, whether there's the bias, especially in business. I got a relationship. I don't want to mess up my friend's job. All of these biases and sampling, and you're going to use that as the way to pay people. And what do you end up with? You end up with a world that still is full of bad profits, and explaining away Net Promoter and not having Net Promoter at the core. One classic example is Uber. They set up a system where they'll fire their drivers if they don't have 5-star ratings. 4.6 is a fireable level of star rating for an Uber driver. And so, of course, people are taught, oh, I get it. This isn't about enriching lives. I just don't want to get the poor guy fired. And then they'll say, oh, and the customer rating, which is a pretty cool idea. The driver rating the customer, I'm in favor of that. But it's this quid pro quo. It has nothing to do with love or loyalty. And therefore, it becomes meaningless. Hotels, everybody. I'm sure my hotel where I stayed, which is pretty good, by the way. Thank you, Adam. It was a couple blocks away. They'll send this survey, but they'll treat it this way. If you don't give me a 10, come talk to us, because I don't want to get in trouble. That is not love or loyalty. And of course, it ruins the credibility of the score and the system, and I think makes it very difficult for smart business people to put it at the core of their decision making. Last one is a Mercedes dealer. I bought a Mercedes. It's a great car, but it was a lousy sales experience because there was lying and dissembling, and it's just the horrible stuff. But at the end of it, he says, "Oh, and I have to have a 10. That's the only passing grade." And you go, wait, what is this about? Well, it's certainly not about loving or enriching my life. So I decided it was time to write another book and get the world back on track. Because whatever, the Hertzes are diving into bankruptcy and using Net Promoter. I'm embarrassed to say that is one of the companies that pretty early on they saw enterprise rent-a-car success and sort of copied the NPS. And winning on purpose is really about purpose. It's trying to make this larger argument that, great organizations exist to make lives better. And I think the way they make employees' lives better is to put them in a position where they can earn 10s from their customers, and which, of course, gets the economic wheel going. But more importantly, it lets people know they're living a life of purpose, and they are making the world better, one person at a time. I call it NPS 3.0, but it's wildly different than most people's NPS organizations because it reflects it's just not purpose. I mean, we talked about purpose is in customer capitalism, which is my world. The reason a business exists, the reason you want to throw your heart and soul into it is you're going to make customers' lives better. The purpose in most businesses is profits. But all these other dimensions, how do we measure it? Well, on one, we measure with profits. And in the other, of course, we care about profits. You can't stay alive without enough profits, but that's where satisfaction deserves to be. Maximizing value deserves to be what you do for your customers. And that has to be measured through things like share of wallet, referral rates, net promoter scores correctly measured, different keystone metrics, different growth engine. You know, if your company, if your CEO, it recognizes we're not going to make our growth targets, what do they tend to do? They do something with the sales and marketing organization. You know, that's where you grow. And that's just not true. Sales and marketing is a big expense. And the way you grow a business is you make sure you're turning more customers into promoters. And if that's the engine that drives growth, you got to be better for your existing customers to grow faster. But that mental model's not there. Employees are to be controlled, they're a cost, whereas in my world, they're brand ambassadors. They are. Human relationships are really the only way to love people. And finally, job of a leader is different. So I'm going to show you some evidence that this isn't just sort of Fred spouting philosophy. This is the right philosophy if you care about generating wealth for your employees and your investors. You meant good to great, because I think we want to inspire to greatness. You know, I want great lives. I want to have success and Jim Collins is the guy who defined greatness in our world. You know, this book has sold 5 million copies. It is the go-to place on great leadership. But look at those companies that were the exemplars, who are great companies. They're not great. There are several bankruptcies. They're the Hertzes of the world, where moral bankruptcy has either turned them bankrupt or is sending them that way. I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. Look at the companies that we use as the basis for the Ultimate Question 2.0. They're still pretty good companies. And when I was going back and I was thinking, what is going on? The world, the way I see it, is not how most people. Let's look at this shareholder returns. Let's look at how well those good to great companies did in the 10 years after that book was written. And the result is those companies were 0.4 times mediocre. You know, the median is mediocre. So how can you have great being not only mediocre, but sucks? Good to great to sucks versus the companies who actually love their customers. They delivered 5 times the North American median in the 10 years after the book was published. That's unbelievable. That's never happened. There is no mutual fund, there is no ETF, no private equity fund that has achieved that level of performance. And I sort of figured that out and started investing on those insights, and it's been very good for me. Good to great mentions the word customer 56 times in a 400-page book. First mention is on page 24. It's almost as if greatness can be talked about seriously without thinking that much about customers. Customers are an afterthought. And so that means that philosophy has nothing in common, well, very little in common with customers as purpose. We mention it 1,300 times. It's just one way to get in your head. There's the world, and most of your CEOs love that book, and I actually like it pretty much too. It's a lot of good ideas, but I think he made it up from his general principles, not from those exemplar companies. Does this make money for you? Well, I'm going to give you 3 examples that most people don't think about as love and loyalty. One is in the phone business, mobile phones. T-Mobile was the worst, I think you lived there. They were the worst brand in mobile phone, number 5 or 6. Lowest retention rate, so highest churn rate, worst technology, worst everything, owned by Deutsche Telekom. And Deutsche Telekom was one of the companies that I think was an early sampler of NPS, linked it to people's bonuses, figured out that it destroys everything, and so they went on to another metric, and then another metric. And I'm thinking, well, T-Mobile is not going to be us. But they embraced these ideas. And the new guy, the CEO that came in, this is their chief customer officer who told me the story and was part of that turnaround. That's why she's the chief customer officer today. They were the ones that got rid of the complex rate plans. They got rid of long-term contracts. Abusive roaming fees, gone. Unbelievable. And closed the loop with every detractor. This sounds like Fred's favorite company. And let me show you all of those things that the accountants would say, that you can't afford to do that. They went from the worst NPS in the business to the best. And I use a database here that Bain has created an NPS prism that really gets NPS measured correctly. Double-blind, monstrous panel size, carefully constructed. So this is really reliable NPS data. And as they went, see how good your memory is. T-Mobile's first, Verizon's second, AT&T is third. Let's look at the shareholder returns over that period. The only one that beat the market, and I use VTI, the Vanguard Total Index Trust, it's sort of the largest of the big index funds that takes the average of the stock market. The only one that beat the stock market is the loyalty leader, T-Mobile. And number two, remember Verizon was number two? You see a pattern here? Total shareholder return is lining up perfectly with NPS. And it's not the metric, it's how much the customers felt the love. Think of it as that. It's an indicator of how many customers felt loved by their provider. Discover is a credit card, one of the top handful in the United States. I didn't carefully track it. It was owned by Sears, and then Sears went bankrupt, and I thought, it has to be a mediocre company. I was wrong. It was run by a guy who used to work for me at Bain. He was actually on my early team that got loyalty economics quantified. David Nelms is his name, and he just did everything right on the customer is king. You see the list. They got rid of annual fees, all of the tricks and traps. I mean, credit cards are almost as bad as rental cars in terms of discovering ways to abuse customers profitably. And he'd stopped it, and here's what happened financially. This is worth staring at. This looks at total shareholder return on the vertical, and NPS on the horizontal. So the guy with the highest NPS has the highest total shareholder return. And so on for every competitor. And this is, if you're a professional investor, this is like, oh my God, this is incredible, because I can get NPS data rigorously, carefully, and understand who has quality growth and sustainable profits and is going to generate true value to shareholders over the long term. And this we're finding business after business. And it's evidence that, the world doesn't see things the way Fred does. But Fred is right. It really is. Tesla, how many customer-friendly things they did, including getting rid of the car dealer. The horrible car dealer experience that I've had, you don't have that. You go online, there's about 5 choices, you click it, it's totally transparent, no baloney. It's heaven. And let's look at what the total shareholder return versus NPS, customer NPS, is in that industry. You start going, wow, I finally, the scales are falling from my eyes. I'm seeing what's driving true economic prosperity. It comes from loving customers and earning their loyalty. How is the world missing this? Because I sort of missed it for a long time, I'll be honest. This is Andy Taylor. There are a few guys in my life who had enormous influence. This is one of them. Andy, he built Enterprise Rent-A-Car into the largest car rental company on earth. And when he started, it was just a little family leasing business in St. Louis. He had this philosophy of, the only way to grow a business profitably is to treat customers so well that they come back for more and bring their friends. In other words, to love them. And he went past Avis, he went past Hertz. Avis, we try harder, not hard enough, because Enterprise, not biggest in the world. As a private company, he did not need the funny money from Wall Street to become the largest fleet of cars on Earth, which is that's a lot of assets to buy. And think about that. This is the miracle, the economic miracle. But it's the same miracle at Lego, at Apple, at Discover Card, and it is invisible to the world who sees business through the accountant's lens. And why is it invisible? Read the words. Customers coming back for more and bringing their friends is the core, the fusion engine that drives prosperity. And accounting doesn't measure that. It just doesn't. So when I say, go measure your earned growth rate, that people shake their heads and say, we're going to figure that out. That's tricky. There's a lot of subtle questions in there. We're going to have to dig in. But it's time to dig in because it's the only sustainable source of profitable growth. I'll show you the logic behind that. Am I taking too much time here, Adam? A lot of people talk about CAC to LTV. You guys know what that is? Customer acquisition cost versus lifetime value of a customer. It's sort of the language I tried back in 1996 with my first book, The Loyalty Effect. And it's how you think about the world if you were trained in finance like I was. You think about a customer as an initial investment in year one. And those are two different kinds of customers. The gold ones are customers who turn into promoters. The black ones are the average of all the passives and detractors. It happens to be pretty close to a real business, but I just disguise it here. Look at the black. You're investing a fair amount up front, and you've got some returns, but then there's, diminished and they defect. Turns out that's not a very impressive set of economics. You wouldn't want to invest in a company that just had that cash, that molecule of growth, that building block that looks like the black bars. If you're fancy, you can do net present values and discount rates, but just common sense. You can see that visually. Or if you generate promoters, those gold bars, that's a pretty small investment because promoters tend to come in on referral more often than not. So there's less sales expense. And then they tend to stay longer and buy more stuff. They feel the love. And if they do refer, they are monstrously profitable. Those gold bars, think about what the net present value is of that. And you start to see, I get how Andy Taylor built this. Andy Taylor's family is worth $30 billion or more today, not by screwing his customers and tricks and traps, but because he's built a business on gold bars better than his competitors. Nobody's perfect. And that's one of the cool things about this philosophy is even the apples still have room to progress. But when you build a business that is cash flow building blocks that look like those gold bars, it's a different world. You can invest more in your employees, in your customers, and your investors are still better off. CAC to LTV is this popular ratio. It's, if I have a lifetime value, and this is all averages. Most companies have no idea the gold bars versus the black bars because they don't keep track of this, right? Accountants don't track those things. So the financial guys look at CAC to LTV and they'll invest in a business if the ratio is 3-to-1. But that's not what's really going on. Referrals, if you go the gold bars that I just showed you, the CAC to LTV there is more like 24-to-1. It's mind-bogglingly awesome investment if you can generate a customer who not only becomes a promoter, but becomes an active promoter who refers. Because you sort of attribute all of that future cash flow back to that customer who created it for you, not your salesman. You might have need some sales expense to get them in the door and get communicated correctly. And then these bought customers, they have a horrible CAC to LTV. They're destroying value. And most mature businesses today have tons of that right set of bars going on. Their sales force and marketing is destroying value for the company. Meanwhile, thinking that, our CAC to LTV is fine at 3-to-1. And these invisible forces become pretty clear when you actually keep track of who your promoters are, who your passives are. And I thought, we're never going to turn this into an NPS kind of science. It's just not simple enough. Until I met First Republic Bank. First Republic Bank is one of these companies like Enterprise Rent-A-Car that started with $8 million in capital. This was a private equity investment. In 85, they put in $8 million. Today, it's worth $31 billion. It's a lot of gold bars. And when you see the world in the gold, through my lenses, you actually see how this makes sense. But it's always been a mystery to the financial analysts. How can these guys grow in a mature business, banking, which is low margin, lots of risk? And when you grow faster than the market in a risk-holding business like insurance, banking, and so forth, you're going to get crappy customers. You're going to be dropping your risk standards and just waiting for never happened. But they have a hard time convincing the analysts who see the world through accounting lenses. So they came up with this display. I don't know how quick you are. This took me a while to stare at. But they basically are saying, of all of our growth in deposits and loans, here's how much of it is coming from existing customers growing their balances, net of defections or decliners, plus their referrals. And I thought, oh my God, if a bank can do it, anybody can do it. And that's what I'm saying. Do it. You have to have this understanding if you want to have people understand that loving customers is the right philosophy of business. And you won't know who's doing a good job. Yeah, NPS shines a light on it, but surveys, response rates, sample bias, earned growth is an accounting metric. Just tell me how much of your growth is coming from existing customers coming back for more and bringing their friends, and suddenly we have something that everybody can relate to in the finance world. So this is the mindset, and Adam and Camilla's business. It's important. The Medallias, the Qualtrics, all of the tech platforms. This is vital in order to live this, because standard accounting does not do it for you. Earned growth, as you heard earlier in this presentation or in the conference, it's your net revenue retention rate, which is sort of a standard statistic in some businesses, plus your earned new customers, plus the bought new customers. That equals total growth. And as you know, the only one of these numbers that is visible to accountants is the one on the far right. They don't dissect it down into its components, and you must remember the importance of the gold bars versus the black bars. So, earned growth, back to moral philosophy. We've been in finance for a while here. We started with love and loyalty. We're getting back to love and loyalty. Earned growth is when customers feel the love, when you have made their life better, so much better, they refer their friends. New customers might be a good investment, but I'd put a caution sign there because they're never as good as you think they are unless you turn them into promoters. In a mature business, what I've seen is the only companies that actually have a reasonable payback, internal rate of return, if you're thinking of every customer as an investment, like a venture capitalist would, the only ones that pay off are guys that turn into promoters. Everything else is value destroying. And this raises the question for me as well, how high is up? I know a high net promoter score, but what's a high earned growth rate? I don't know that. And there's, earned growth is where a net promoter was 20 years ago. Really important idea, lots of questions to answer before we can make it a practical tool that everyone uses. And as you know, there's still an awful lot of improvement on NPS required. But in earned growth, First Republic, if you put it into these terms, you take the numbers that I showed on that previous slide, their net revenue retention is 113%. So they are growing. Their resting growth rate, no marketing or sales, is 13% a year, which in banking is unheard of. Plus, the referrals of their existing customers are driving that resting growth rate up to 18%. It's 13 plus 5. They are bringing in new customers, but only about a third of their new customers, 5.5, 2.5, 2/3 of their new customers are referred customers. And that's what's generating 21% growth. Another way to think about it is the earned growth ratio, which I like as the quality of growth metric. It just looks, of all the total growth they've got, what percentage of that was earned. So in that case, it was 85%. These are the highest numbers I've seen in banking. So I have a benchmark there. I actually have a few others because Bain's been working with beta groups and some others to to understand where the world is. One I'll tell you about, and I talk about these guys in the book. Built is a SaaS company, software as a service. They actually take paper instructions and make them go away. They put it into a 3D CAD that works on your phone or your pad and makes it really easy to assemble things or use them. Built is growing, and I saw their earned growth rate. I was just writing the book, I got introduced to Built, and I said, oh my God, this is the highest earned growth rate I've ever run across. Their net revenue retention rate is 150%. Their new customers are primarily coming in through referral. So they're up there in they're not only growing at 70% a year, but their earned growth ratio is 93%. And they're generating, this has been a very, very attractive investment for me over the last couple of years. The venture capital kind of tripling every year. But how do you know which company is buying customers versus earning? You really have to get net revenue retention rate measured and reported in a consistent way. That's the easy part. The hard part is, how can we figure out for our new customers which ones are primarily the result of referral? And that we're solving industry by industry, beta group by beta group, because it's a little bit different in each situation. But it is vital, because otherwise you default to accounting, which puts you on a path to moral bankruptcy and financial bankruptcy. You're just in that slow death without knowing it, unless you actually can raise this idea of the reason our business exists is to earn growth. With that, maybe, I know there's going to be a Q&A session here. Think of the challenges you have as those. If I'm going to grow, I need gold bars. So let's not mess around with black bars. If I bring in a new customer as a salesman and there's black bars, I don't need it. I don't deserve a commission. I haven't created any value for the company. How do we create more promoters? That's customer selection, figuring out how to delight customers. It's a lot of things that aren't in the sales and marketing team right now. How do I activate more referrals? And this is one of those areas where I've seen companies bribe we'll give you a free one if you'll bring in a new customer. I don't think bribes are earned growth. I do think that you can recognize a referral, donate to charity. Maybe it's a modest benefit that just makes it worth giving the referral through a platform so you can keep track of it. But how can you actually get people to give referrals? And then how can you make sure they're given in a way that gets people's attention and closes new business for you? And these are essentially black boxes in most organizations today. So I'll close here. I think the great challenge for all of us is, if you buy this idea of love and loyalty at the core of prosperity, and referrals is truly the gold nugget at the core of, we have to find a way to understand why people are giving referrals. Who are the promoters, the active promoters? So identify them, get to the root cause of what made them take the personal risk to co-brand their personal reputation and support you, because it is not riskless. If you've ever given, I gave a referral of a dentist once and something didn't work out and a lady lost her teeth, that you don't give referrals ever again for deepen, and what's the right way to recognize, or how could I get people to refer in a way that's visible to me, as opposed to the word of mouth that is out there mushing around and is important, but no one knows how to make hide or hair, and no one puts value on it. Accountants don't know how. And at the same time, once you know someone has come in as the result of a referral, who are these guys? What was it that made that that other person said that was so convincing? And how do you make sure they feel welcome and turn into gold bars at a very high yield rate? This is a little bit uncharted territory. I wish I could say, oh, here's 5 companies that are doing this brilliantly, just copy them. They're not out there yet, except for the First Republics and Builts. There is a handful that I see at the nascent. So don't be frustrated. 20 years from now, I think we'll have a science that is where NPS has gotten today. But I think actually we'll make faster progress, because we've never had the economic evidence before that makes it so clear that the only way to to drive prosperity for your investors is by inspiring your teams of employees to love customers. And with that, let me turn it over to you guys for questions. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
Fred, thanks for that. You know, you were talking about the gold bars.
You got it?
I've been reading your book, and this was, if there was ever a case for actually paying extra for color in a book, that would have made sense. Because it's a wonderful idea, right? Just a tip there.
The front has gold, but
the front has gold. There you go.
Expensive.
Well, on the back cover maybe. But hey, thank you so much for that. I'm really inspired by this, and I'm pretty certain there's some great questions out there. I'm just going to kick off with one, if that's okay. Because almost all of our work is with B2B. And the question I get asked for my customers, and there's a few out the front here, is why would a B2B customer refer another one, maybe his competitor, to the vendor? That's a hard one to answer. How do you feel about that?
Oh, I don't think very many people recommend their competitors. The classiest companies do. If they know what they're good at, and they say, actually, what you're asking for there, that's a degree of engineering or specialty, or that's not our sweet spot. From what I know of the industry, those are the class acts that are good people and good results. That's the highest form of love, and I actually do think it pays off. And the best salesmen in the world, the salespeople in the world, that's how they behave. They don't sell their stuff because it's profitable. They sell it because they actually are convinced that it's going to make their customer's life better and succeed. At Bain & Company, if somebody comes in and says, Fred, I don't do this anymore, but we really need this kind of project, or we need some digital specialty thing, and I really love the Bain teams, but Bain doesn't do that. We'll help you find the guys that are best at it. But if you're just grabbing revenue, that has nothing in common with the gold bars.
Good answer. All right, let's take some from the audience, if that's okay. Camilla, have you found a few people who got a question?
Yeah? Oh, yeah. I just thought maybe it was a bit good to warm up because it can be a bit intimidating. I actually have one for you. How do you then feel about referral campaigns?
I'm open to them, but I haven't seen a great one yet. There's I haven't been to Europe for 2 or 3 years. It's the beginning of COVID, so this is a whole new thing for Fred again.
Thanks for coming, by the way.
I have strung together a few things to once I'm on a plane to have maximum impact, because at my age you're really taking a risk with this. Where I'm going, London, next is a company called Mention Me. Mention Me is a tech platform that has gotten good at providing incentives for someone to refer that aren't a bribe but are appropriate. And especially in B2B, you can't sort of reward the employee. It's that's patronage. That's go to jail for that. But you can recognize them through a donation to charity or something that really is appropriate and makes them feel good. And that the referred person knows, they're not just doing it because they want the bribe. But then there has to be an appropriate reward for that, the person who's being referred. It's either a warm welcome. I mean, maybe it's a financial advantage. If it's presented in the right way, maybe it's charitable. But getting that sort of ethically and socially appropriate, that's the trick. So it's the tech platform and the subtle ways of making sure that works. And I think in the Mention Me is like Built. They have a crazy high earn growth rate, and I invested in them, and I'm going to try and help them become the standard in their industry. But it's a long way to go. They're in B2C, and B2B is going to be another subtle set of issues.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, great companies get 2/3 of their new customers are earned. That's a pretty high standard, and I think just for all of you, what percentage of your customers would tell you, when they're brand new and they can remember how important it was to have a referral or a recommendation from someone they trusted And I believe from what I've seen in B2B, it's even more than consumer. Consumers will trust advertising. In B2B, they're small circles, small communities. They know each other. They know who treats people right. So the truth comes through much more accurately. Yes?
Yeah, it was just a question about the same topic, really, because very often there is no one single point of referral. There are many over time. So how do you actually find out that this is an early growth case or not?
There's a couple of paths you can go here. One is the path of, it's a 40 factor complicated model where I'm going to weight all the different things and try to value every one of them from price to all the way to referral. Or you could say, let's get started with something practical. Was recommendation referral important? Was it the top one? If there's 5 reasons you joined, was it number 1 or 2? That would be a way to start getting the understanding. And I think how far you need to go past that is going to be different in every business. But in Bain & Company, I'll give you a practical example. We almost always, with a new client, they are going to want to talk to an existing client or two to see if we are what we say we are. Or they come in because they were on the board of a company that used us and they saw us at work. So we know almost everything is coming in through referral one way or the other. The one where, I'd like to go talk, Fred, you've got a great relationship with the guy that runs that business. Can my prospective client go talk to them or do a site visit? And in a Bain system, when you do that, that goes into the record book. And at bonus time, you get paid. If that becomes a gold bar client, some of that goes to you because it was your referral. You created the promoter that generated that. And when you have that kind of compensation system for your sales force, you start getting rigorous. And that's the appropriate thing to do in many cases. And you'll get into subtleties of, gosh, we at Bain, we really don't know how important it is. So we actually have to have the client tell us. There were 5 site visits. Which ones were the ones that really changed your thinking? So when we talk to a client right up front, we tend to explain our job is not to just get business from you, it's to turn you into a promoter. We don't say gold bars, but that's the idea, we only want to invest in a relationship if we think we can turn you into a promoter. And this idea that, and if you choose to do business with us, we're going to ask you to help us understand what was most helpful to you in making that choice. Now, that takes time and energy, but think of all the time that is wasted on just bullshit accounting that no one trusts. And I say that one of the most successful private equity guys in the world is a former Bain guy. And I asked, what do you have? And they hire a lot of Bain teams. I said, what's the primary thing you hire Bain teams to do? Cut the accounting, which is meaningless today, and get it into economics, not just cash flows, but true economics. There's just an enormous distance between accounting and economics to make decisions. And the best people, the smart people know that. And so when someone says, oh, that's going to be a lot of work to tease this, it is a lot of work. But just like the private equity guys, it's worth it to get to the true economics of the business to make smart choices.
I thought that was a really good thing.
That was not a short answer, was it? I didn't. Sorry.
It was your point about thinking about this as another closed loop process, to go back to the people who'd referred you and say, why did you do it?
Yeah.
That had never occurred to me before. I thought that was a brilliant insight.
Yeah, there's 2 elements of this closed loop, and it is nascent. There is not a lot of deep thinking on this subject that I've seen.
Another question from the back of the room.
A 2-part question about churn. Do you see a correlation that the lower the earned growth is, that the higher the churn rate is?
I do.
And secondly, how do you bridge the fact that in most companies the new customer acquisition is owned by somebody else, then retention rates and churn are owned by?
You mean you have a broker or dealer organization that's an independent company and they're the ones that are bringing...
Or 2 different board members who have conflicting KPIs.
Oh. Well, Chapter 5 in Winning on Purpose was written for boards of directors and investors. I hope more people will read that chapter and think about what its implications are. But if the board as a whole, not just one of the functions, that entire group has to be held accountable for progress in earned growth. Because it not only makes the moral case, which I think is a pretty straightforward case. And good leaders, they want to treat people right and make the world better. But the economic case, I think, is pretty fresh. And it's pretty powerful. And it's broadening. The more industries that NPS Prism illuminates with real net promoter scores, true shareholder value creation is out there and pretty reliable metrics today. I think smart board members are going to think this isn't just mine, it's the group, because we can't succeed without it. I think but the question about, the sales, I thought you were going to say, the sales force is getting paid $1 million a year for bringing in these clients, and all the people back in the back rooms or whoever's serving them, their costs. And it just shows how the accounting worldview and the confusion of, I pay a salesman a ton to bring in a new customer, and I don't even know if it's gold bars or black bars or red bars, pure detractors. We're going to pay them $1 million. And that's one of the places where companies can save enormous money today. You need to invest more in delighting customers. Get the indoor fixed, so you're not wasting so much money on investments in customers who never turn into long-term assets.
We have one here in the middle.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Fred. I actually worked with NPS in some big telecom companies, and it's like listening to you a little bit gets me confused, because you talk about love and loyalty, and in the big B2C, it was never about this. And I wonder, as it's misunderstood significantly from the message you're conveying, who is doing what to get that right? Because I sat in some rooms where it was, this is the number, and if we don't change the number to this, we're all screwed. So we were changing the questions, changing the colors, whatever to change the number, but actually not changing anything in reality, right?
I have some cool tricks that will change the number that you haven't mentioned.
So we actually got some suggestions. What if we just change the number and don't tell anyone, right? So I'm thinking, what is being done to address that? Because I think to some extent, this is one of the most misunderstood concepts, listening to you in comparing to the implementations.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
How is that being addressed? Because I think that's kind of a big thing, right?
Yeah, it was a big thing to get me to write another book. I told you, my job was investing in NPS leading companies, because I have this view that capital markets truth will come out through investing intelligently, and what wins will become common knowledge. But as you say, it was just so screwed up, the NPS implementation and understanding. So Winning on Purpose was it was a 7 or 8 year investment of my life. And building the data, putting it in both moral and financial terms that I think most people can get it. It is a radical change. So I don't downplay that. I think the only way to deal with it is honestly, and how it got off track, and what needs to happen to get it back on track. What I'm most proud of is I've been preaching, don't link NPS to people's bonuses and turn it into a pleading gaming joke. But okay, what do I do, Fred? I actually buy your idea, treating customers right, and inspiring my team. That makes sense intuitively. But what can I measure? What can I hold them accountable to? And earned growth is the answer. Measuring earned growth correctly and making that the objective that everyone is, their bonuses, their careers are linked to, that's the right answer. But we won't be able to measure that for months and years practically, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't start today to figure out how to get a rough estimate and then a more precise estimate, and then one that you could actually report to your investors.
Fred, 2 very quick questions. The first one, more economic, but is it possible that the earned growth premium is even higher for detractors that turn into promoters? Or is it always, do you think it's kind of the earned growth premium premium period?
No, I think every customer, every situation is different. But if you can turn a detractor into a promoter legitimately, not by crazy levels of investment or breaking the rules or breaking the backs of your workforce, but a solution that is thoughtful kindness, then yes, they tend to be the most extravagant promoters on earth, because that's when you trust. When you trust a company that when they screw up, they not only fix it, they go beyond fixing it and make you into a promoter. That's the highest standard in business. I just think sometimes detractors are detractors because they were missold, and maybe they have been convinced through so many experiences that turning them into promoters might be just an impossible hill to climb. On the other hand, T-Mobile, when they were in the depths, it would have been easy to say, oh, we just have to change segments. We have just torched. We have scorched earth. All of our old customers who are detractors, we have to go find some fresh green field, blue ocean strategy. Your brand is what your real customers are saying about you. And so I think you probably are right. You have to turn around enough of your the detractors and turn them into promoters before you can be a brand that people are willing to invest in or work for or buy from.
Second question was, you talked a lot about earned growth in the context of love and making sure your customers have a similar experience that you'd want your loved ones to have. Are there lessons for the public sector in these metrics? Are there things that can be applied to more societal type organizations?
God, I hope so. Social Security, Medicare, all those lovely social programs I'm now old enough to be part of, it was not fun. It's just horrid. The IRS, our tax agency, the service levels, and you can see it's horrible to work in those jobs because people know when they're doing work they're proud of or just, and if their customers are yelling at them all the time. So yeah, I think there has to be a way of how, when people enrich, when they go above and beyond, when they exceed your expectations, they have to hear those standing ovations, or why would they bother taking the risks or putting themselves into it? So I do think there's an enormous need for effective feedback in government and nonprofits, and I've seen great progress, but it once again, it takes some very thoughtful thinking about how do I get a feedback system where there's not a lot of gaming, and maybe I should have the IRS agent rate the customer as well as the customer rate the experience, like Airbnb does with guests and renters, or Uber does. I think these two-way ratings, and then how do I minimize the gaming and the signaling and negotiations? Well, should it be anonymous, or does it stay anonymous until there's a window that opens and then it's not anonymous? Or do I just have Big Brother know who's who, but I don't? There are a lot of subtle decisions, and it's one of the chapters I hope you'll read. And there's getting that feedback system right takes a lot more thought than most companies have put into it.
We have another question here.
Yes.
Fred, thank you for your presentation. Very inspirational. I'm definitely not buying the Good to Great book after this. I work in the pharmaceutical industry. It's a heavily regulated industry. There's a lot of things that, best practices that, cannot necessarily apply to, a customer experience program. So from your perspective, what would be, what advice would you give in terms of running a customer experience program in the pharmaceutical industry? It's an industry where we actually, there isn't much adoption in terms of customer experience. Have like a long way to go. So yeah, I would appreciate your advice.
There is. I have a fair amount of experience in pharma, and I know that the challenges, getting feedback from the patient, it's very difficult with privacy, and so you're getting it from physicians and providers. There's all sorts of gamesmanship and so forth there. In any business, like pharma, I would look to my frontline employees for the first wave of feedback and developing the system of, read the chapter on the golden rule. Where do you feel like we're not living up to that standard with our customers? And get your employees into small groups, or maybe it's anonymous feedback or some combination, to tell you where they are not proud and where they're not inspired. And because the people dealing directly with customers, they get it. Now, of course, you should ask your customers, but I've always been offended. People go ask my customers, and I've been dealing with them, and you didn't ask me. It's like you don't trust me. You don't think I understand the situation and why we're doing the root cause better than the customer. So it's you always have an integrated feedback from customer, feedback from employee in the right mix. Surveys work a lot better for employees than they do for customers, and do it on this moral foundation. One of the biggest pharma companies is in our club of NPS companies back in the States, but it's a worldwide firm, and they were the most engaged in the chapter on the golden rule of any of the NPS. Because they know it's not just the relationship you to the customer, it's the communities that you're nested in and the distributors that also have to be better off, not just the two of you. And it's complicated. I think Winning on Purpose, the best thing the Built company I talked about, they have employees read the book chapter by chapter and then sit down in groups and then talk about what needs to change. They use the book as a way to with new employee recruits, and before a guy gets hired, they talk about what the implications are of that book and which chapter made, because they'll find people, because this is a moral community. Businesses, they think of their profit communities, but they're not. People are voluntarily spending their precious minutes on earth towards something that has to be worthwhile, and they get it. The guy at Built, I wish I had this quote, said, his name is Nate Henderson. Nate, this is a lot of time, and this is venture capital funding, so these guys are, let's get progress now. And you're having reading groups. He said, well, Fred, these are the same principles that people live in their home lives as their business lives, and once they understand that, you can move mountains. There is a right way to treat someone. It's the way someone you love should be treated in that situation. And so in terms of change management, it's been very powerful, used in that way. But it's not just read the book and write a book report. It's just a much deeper. The questions we've had, these are deep questions. 90% of people are doing NPS wrong. You can't just sort of say that and have people accept it. That there's layers that you got to get to.
I think we've got time for one more question for Fred. Anyone over the room here? Taylor, you got one over?
We have one more over here.
Hi.
I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but this is the ultimate question.
No pressure at all. Thank you again for an inspirational chat. So we're about to enter a program with Customer Gauge. We're a Swedish public company, high-tech production equipment. What you've done is crystallize for me the execution part of this to make it a success, which is really, there's no way around this. We have to have the CEO and the CFO agree the financial metrics that will be used to support the success of the program. And I've come from finance into sales and marketing, so I know that background. And it seems to me that it's an easy argument, really. Maybe they have to read your book, but there's no way this program can succeed until the earned growth stats come out of the ledgers as opposed to just the P&L, cash flow, and balance sheet. Right? Is that what you're saying, really?
Yeah, and I in the book Winning on Purpose, I use this. There's way too much personal stuff, according to some people, but one of the messages I wanted to get across is the same stuff that makes a good personal life with your family makes a good business life. So I talk about this koi pond, and Adam's actually seen this koi pond. It's very cool. But koi are the symbol in Chinese art of persistence or loyalty. And the reason is they evolved in the mouths of freshwater rivers that go out into the ocean. And so the koi can't live in salt water, but it sort of likes that brackish water of the mouth of a river. And therefore, they have to swim against the current of the river their entire life, or they'll be washed to their death in the salt water. And that's the challenge you have. All of the pressures of the financial currents daily, 24/7, how we set budgets, how we pay bonuses, how our capital allocation is done, they're all deeply flawed. And they get part of it right, but because they are partially right, they will wash you toward moral and eventually financial bankruptcy. It's just on a time cycle that people aren't seeing yet. So yeah, it is very hard. And so there's a chapter on how do I build persistent systems that actually counterbalance those currents, which aren't bad currents necessarily. It's just if they're the only currents, you're headed toward disaster.
Well, hey, I don't think you could have set that answer up any better. I don't know if you really did.
Bet you didn't expect koi fish to be part of the answer, did you?
But I think, but it's really. I mean, I've spoken to many of the people in the room here, and I've known them over the years. That sense of swimming hard against the current, I believe, is what any CX practitioner feels. It's hard work, Fred. So you have any, before you go off, do you have any tips for also how we can get the persistence and how we get the programs to stick in our business?
Yeah. Think about what you want your life to stand for. We got the koi pond. Yeah. Top of the hill, there's this huge bell. It's the loyalty bell. And the reason it's there is because I think a well-lived life has to figure out what you are committed to, what's worthy of self-sacrifice. And freedom is one of the granite columns holding up the bell, because you've got to have freedom of choice before you can choose the loyalties that are worthwhile. But there's wisdom as the other granite post. And I hope we have this same conversation with my kids and grandchildren, that you really have to decide what are the principles that guide your life that are worthy of loyalty, and therefore what organizations, what individuals, and what organizations embody those principles and advance them. And that has to guide your thinking about who you're going to invest and who you're going to spend your moments, your dollars, your moments, however you want to measure your life. And most people have not made that careful assessment of, what is it that's worthy of my loyalty and my commitment. Yeah, I got to stay in my current job for the next year or two, but let's think, if you're going to make the world better and be proud of it and proud to tell your kids about it, it makes some pretty serious shifts from the way the world works today.
That's a wonderful way of it. Ladies and gentlemen, Fred Reichheld, you have really enriched our lives today. Thank you so much.